How's it, Grant here, and welcome to my camera comparison between the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. Now, every year most people want to know, should I stick with the standard iPhone model or upgrade to the Pro, especially when it comes to the camera features. And so this year on the standard 14, Apple has actually upgraded the sensors, and they're sticking with 12 megapixel sensors, but they're promising improved low light performance from both the main camera as well as the ultra wide angle camera. They're also throwing in some extra features that you find in the Pro model, like cinematic video, which you're watching here, as well as action mode for extra video stabilization. And like most years in the Pro model, they have an extra camera. This year they have a 3x optical telephoto lens. They also have an upgraded 48 megapixel sensor on the 14 Pro, so gone away from the standard 12 megapixel sensor to a much larger 48 megapixel sensor. So we'll see if that makes any kind of a difference here. Also on the Pro model, you have the Pro file formats like Pro RAW and Pro Res. So if you like to edit all your photos and videos in software after the fact, then you might want to go with the Pro model for that. But we're going to test out all these features. I'm going to show you all the results so you can decide for yourself which of these two camera systems might be best for your smartphone camera needs. So let's go ahead and check out all the photos and videos and let me know what you think. Alright, so here's a real video test of the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. This is the ultra wide angle camera to start out on each, and this is being shot at 4K 30 frames per second. So I just pan around to give you a feel for how these ultra wide angle cameras look like here in this particular setting and how they compare. It's fall, so obviously we have some nice colors here, some greens, blues, and you can see those nice fall orange colors in the background there. So let's go ahead and move into the main lens now on the standard 14 and on the 14 Pro. So again, 12 megapixel camera on the iPhone 14, upgraded with a slightly larger aperture, and of course 48 megapixel upgrade on the Pro, moving away from that standard 12 megapixel. So this is what this is what the main cameras look like here in this particular setting. We'll pan around so you can see how the exposure adjusts around based on the light. And if we move over here to the right, we'll test zoom out on that cell tower. So you're only going to get a 3x digital zoom here in 4K on the iPhone 14. And of course, you do have a 3x optical telephoto zoom there on the Pro. And the Pro will go all the way up to, I believe, a 9x digital zoom here. So 9x digital there on the Pro. So not the longest range zoom on either, but there's a difference. And we'll back this out to 1x here and test autofocus on the post with the standard 14. So there you go, pretty snappy autofocus like iPhone normally does here on the 14 and on the 14 Pro. Even with the larger sensor, still fairly snappy. Might be a shade slower, but still looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and test stabilization. We'll walk down the stairs here so you can see how the stabilization looks like side by side on each of these main sensors here, and we'll jog, try to stress it out and see what that looks like. So there you go, video test on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. All right, so here's a quick test of the rear camera and cinematic mode here in 4K 30 frames per second. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like here in some varying lighting conditions here outside. So now the sun is directly behind me, so you can see what that does to the image quality, and also pay attention to the background blur effect here and how that's holding up as the camera moves around. So now the sun is coming off to the right, and you can see what that looks like here, and now it's going to be directly in front of me. So a lot of light coming in right now. So there's a quick test of the cinematic mode on the rear cameras in 4K 30 frames per second on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro here in these outdoor lighting conditions. All right, here's a quick test of action mode, which is supposed to give you some extra stabilization like action cameras. I believe this is cropping in on the ultra wide angle camera. So this is at 2.8K resolution according to the camera here. So I'm just gonna jog, so keep your eye on the horizon, see how steady these cameras actually keep the video. So there's just a quick test of the action mode here on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. So here's a quick front-facing camera test outdoors here in 4K 30 frames per second from the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. So we're in some pretty even lighting conditions right now, so the image quality should be looking fairly balanced. But I'll go ahead and pan around so you can see what this looks like here in some changing light with the sun directly behind me right now, so you can see what that's doing to the picture quality and exposure here. I'll just keep panning around so you can see what this looks like here as the lighting position changes, and what it looks like now with the sun directly in front of me. So lots of light coming in front of me, and we'll go ahead and start walking just to see the stabilization and how that compares here on the 14 and the 14 Pro. So let me know what you think of the front facing cameras here on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. So we're back again, this time at 4K 60 frames per second with the front facing cameras on the iPhone 14 and the 14 Pro. So I just pan around to give you a bit of motion so you can see what that 60 frames per second quality looks like here, as well as how that looks into the changing light conditions as well. And now with the light directly in front of me and with some motion as we start walking, you can see what the stabilization looks like here in 60 frames. So let me know what you think of this 4K 60 frames per second footage on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. And of course, a feature on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro is this cinematic video, where this artificial blurred out background that you see here, and this can be shot up to 4K 30 frames per second, which is what you're seeing right here. So this is what it looks like here in some outdoor conditions, in some direct sunlight. So with the changing light now, with the light sun directly behind me, you can see what that's doing to the cinematic video here and how that background blur is holding up with some motion as well. So let me know what you think about this cinematic video quality here from the front facing cameras on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. Everyone, so here's a real video test on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. This is the ultra wide angle camera on each to start. So I'm just gonna pan around here so you can see what these ultra wide angle cameras look like here in this particular scene. And I'll go ahead and move into the main lens now. So main lens on the 14 and on the 14 Pro. So I'll go ahead and pan around here so you can see what the main lens looks like and how they compare side by side. Again, the 12 megapixel sensor on the iPhone 14 and the upgraded 48 megapixel sensor on the 14 Pro. You can see how they're handling that really bright street light, flaring it out a decent amount. It's a bright light, so that's going to happen, but a little bit more flare than some other phones, I think. And if you pan around this way, we'll start walking to test stabilization and how that looks like here in low light. And as we transition from that really bright scene to a much more darker scene, you can see how the picture quality looks as well as how the stabilization looks. You tend to see some micro jitters in low light, so pay attention for that. And as we move around the corner here, it is much darker than that bright scene back there, but what I see through the viewfinder is that both of these cameras are definitely brightening up the scene much more than what I'm seeing here with my own eyes. It's much darker than this. If we pull up here, we'll point up into the night sky, and because of that, you're going to see some noise here. There is some light pollution, but there's no clouds, so it's not like a lot of gray in the sky. So that's just due to the cameras brightening things up here, bumping up that ISO. And if we move over here down to this mixed lighting situation down this alleyway, you can see they added a couple of street lamps here. They're not too bright, but they are adding a bit more light. And so you can see how these phones are performing in this particular mixed lighting situation here. So there you go, 4K video test on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. So here's a bit of a low light test of the front facing cameras on the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. I'm starting out in my usual testing spot with some pretty good light around me so you can see what these cameras can do in some pretty optimal lighting here at night. And so you can see all the lights to the left and to the right of me. And this is being shot at 4K 30 frames per second. 60 frames per second gets a little bit darker naturally in some low light, so it's not as optimal to use. But let's go ahead and start walking to test stabilization so you can see what that looks like here side by side on these front facing cameras. And we're gonna move over to a bit of a darker situation here so you can see what that looks like compared to that really bright area behind me. And I'll be walking by a water fountain to my right so you can see how these microphones are performing against that background noise there. And so if I pan all the way around here, you'll see how these front facing cameras do into those really bright street lights behind me, as you can see. So overall, not looking too bad there, not flooding them out as much as the rear cameras were. And so let's go ahead back here to where it's a bit darker here. So you can see what that looks like here side by side. And these definitely are brightening things up a little bit more. You might be seeing some noise because of that, but that's pretty natural. It is much darker than what these cameras are actually showing. So if you like things brightening up, if you like cameras brightening things up so you can actually see more, these are doing a pretty good job. But of course, introducing some noise and maybe some color accuracy issues there. But anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for this camera comparison between the new iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. So let me know what you thought and which one you personally preferred. And so as far as what I think, I thought the iPhone 14 definitely performed very well with its upgraded 12 megapixel camera. I was skeptical about low light performance and how much better it would really be with a slightly wider aperture. And actually low light photos looked a lot better than I actually thought it would be on the standard 14. So low light performance on the 14 actually was better than I expected. And so generally what I would say is that unless you're going to use the Pro features and the Pro photo and video formats like Pro RAW and Pro Res on the 14 Pro, you don't like editing your photos and videos in software, you're not going to do any of that stuff, you don't care about the extended digital zoom, which is 5 times on the natural 14 and the 15 times on the Pro, or you don't care about the optical telephoto lens on the Pro, you don't care about any of that stuff, then I say definitely save some money. And the 14 is going to be more than capable for a lot of the point and shoot folks out there. Produces some great photos and videos. You get all the video capabilities too that you do on the 14 Pro. You get cinematic mode, you get 4K 60, stabilization, HDR, all that stuff on the standard 14. So you're getting a lot on the 14. And again, like I said, if you're not going to use those Pro features, then you're going to be very much satisfied with the 14 and saving some money there. But let me know what you thought about this camera comparison. Which one would you personally prefer? And maybe you picked up one of these. Let me know which one you went with yourself and why. And drop me all those comments in the comment section below. We can engage further there. As always, Thanks for watching.